So we're gonna complete the cupcake by painting the liner with watercolor and these wonderful koi watercolor markers. They have the tip of a brush and they blend just like watercolor when you overlap them. You get this nice smooth transition so you can build up really beautiful gradations by overlapping them. And you can get beautiful strong line work, and if you add water to them, you can blend and bleed the ink, just like you would with watercolor paint. And so we're going to use a combination of watercolor and these markers. But first, I want you to play with the markers, experiment with them, see what you can do. You can even do a little practice cupcake liner. This would be a good time to look at examples online to see what styles of shading you might be interested in developing for this work. Um, a lot of you chose to do your cupcake in the same style as my first demo, which I am fine with, but I do want to push you to find other ways of working with these materials, other combinations of lines and textures and different applications of shading so that you start to develop your own distinct style. So it's good to follow what I'm doing, but to also break free from it and explore and experiment a little bit more. And that comes from practice. So definitely practice before you begin. Here you can see I began first just by darkening around the cake for the inside of the liner. And next I'm going to apply some green watercolor paint. I chose green because it's complementary to red. We want to be using those complementary colors to create contrast and emphasis within our work. So now you can see the markers do bleed, and I'm pulling that dark green marker down to start to build up the form of the cupcake liner. I'm really thinking about lights and darks, so that which side is darker is the left side, and then keeping the highlights on the right side. So again, we want to build that sense of dimension as we develop the style of our painting. I'm keeping the style of the painting for the cupcake liner to be much more loose than I did for the cupcake and frosting. Remember to let things dry as well. Now I'm going in with the marker and starting to add in some line work that I'm done refining with my brush to build up the shading. And I'm repeating these steps, and you can see I'm adding hatching lines. Okay, a vocab word, hatching lines. Those are parallel lines to build up shading. And then I'm adding some darker lines into that shading, and then I'll take a fine brush and kind of drag those lines and blend them in just a little bit. I'm still really exploring with these markers and seeing what they're going to do and having to revise and refine as they react to the water. And then I'm pulling some hatching lines with the brush as well in a round way. So I've been working up and down, and now I've also pulled them across. Remember, this is a round object, and so you want to create that sense of dimension. If you have lines, you want to pull them in a round way as well as up and down perhaps. So now I'm going back in, again emphasizing the up and down and the side to side to create that sense of dimension with those hatch marks. Then I'm defining the bottom area. Make sure the bottom line of your liner is the same curve as the top, right, to get that nice elliptical shape. And now I'm going to add in some more complementary colors. So I'm going to bring the very light pink, or pink is just a lighter shade of red, guys. It gets its own name, but it's actually just a tint of red, I should say, where you add white. And so now I'm blending that in. If I went too heavy, when you blend red and green together, they cancel each other out and you get brown. But doing it lightly here, I'm not getting an unattractive, muddy mess. I'm just lightly tinting what I already have to create more contrast in the cupcake liner and to place emphasis, especially where the pink stands out the most. My eye is going there, so I'm creating more emphasis in the highlights. Now I'm taking a break from my cupcake liner. I'm liking the looseness, I like the style, and I'm thinking about the table. Now, you do not need to do the table today, but I decided to go ahead and add it in case you guys wanted to get a head start on what you will be doing for part of your async lesson tomorrow. So you can see I'm choosing blues and purples. Again, I'm thinking about complementary colors, and because my frosting has yellow and orange in it, blue and purples are complementary to um, orange and yellow. Blue is complementary to orange, purple is complementary to yellow, and so that's going to create additional contrast in my work. Just trying to give you a better view of the whole thing right here. And then I'm going to take my markers, work in that lower height, that kind of cast shadow, that deepest part of the shadow right under the cupcake. Definitely always think about, like, is my shadow working with the direction of my light source? You don't want your shadow going in the wrong direction, so be aware. And then I'm reworking. I've got that bleeding happening into my cupcake liner, so I've got to revise and refine. I should probably wait until it dries, but I am showing my impatience here. So again, trying to revise and refine this area. Pulling that line work back up. Working back and forth from side to side. And then I'm building up my shadow some more, letting the wet on wet technique bleed and blend, and then going over it with a brush to kind of control it and move it where I want it to. And thinking about shadow and dimension, I'm adding a little bit more shading to the left side to continue to build up that dimension and shadow. We want the object to go from dark to light. Even for this project, we're not doing any kind of overly flat style because I do want you to learn how to build dimension with these materials. In your final portrait, if you end up with a style that's very graphic, very flat, um, that is an artistic decision and that is fine. But for this one, we do want to know how to create dimension. So now you can see I let it dry and I'm coming in with a micron pen. These are also water soluble because I really wanted to define the bottom edge, and I wasn't getting that with the other markers, that kind of tight line, precise line. So I'm coming in and putting it there. Note how I don't go all the way around, just putting a little bit of a black line there, not even to the edge because that could flatten it out. And I'm using this black line to really define that darkest shadow under the cupcake, and I'm using that fine small brush to then blend the micron pens. It's important to note that the micron pens are water soluble, so they need to always go on last because if you paint over them, that line work will bleed, and a lot of times we use micron pens for details and outlines that we want to be crisp and clean. So just be aware of that if you use them in your work. And then you can see I'm just going in, refining it with a little bit more color. Really thinking of the shape of the shadow, bringing in that extra dimension. And there we have it, you guys. Could I go back, do more refinement? I could, but I do like the contrast of the loose style against the more graphic style, and I wanted to show you guys different styles. So I hope this helps, and I wish you the best in creating your own. Remember, try not to copy exactly what I did, but to use it as a starting place to apply technique and develop your own style with a sense of dimension.